Margot is wearing the head of a bear. Willow is scaring the crows with a stare. Daphne is watching, for she is quite stuck. We will see how many leaves we can pluck. Isn't it sweet? When we are hungry, we'll find things to eat, stolen from sellers who shout in the street. Strawberries that dribble with juice in the heat. Ribbons all stream from a magic machine, powered by gypsies who look like a dream. Dark eyes revealing what they really mean. Don't you just love?
Hello and welcome to the third of the MSL salons. The topic of today's salon is Rock Fair, making a song and dance of it. And we're going to be talking about folk song tradition and exploring folk music around fairs. My name's Rosanna Lowe and I'm a writer and a story collector. And the song that you've just heard is by the folk duo who are here with us today, Rokurokubi, and it was called Come to the Fair and was an original composition by them. This is linked to a commission, a writing commission that I have to explore the history of Rock Fair in Hastings, which was once held by the White Rock and then later on at the America Ground, and ran from medieval times up until the 1860s when it was banned for being too wild. And both of the folk duos involved today, Rokurokubi and Lunatraktors, have been involved in looking at traditional fair songs as inspiration. And there is a great tradition of songs about fairs. A lot of them are to do with the romance of the fair, but also romance that happened at the fair, meeting up with kind of hoping to meet the love of your life at the hiring fair and hoping that you were going to be hired to work on the same farm as them, or about journeys to or from the fair where some kind of romance happened. But there's also a lot of supernatural and kind of magical things happening in songs about fairs as well. Even something really familiar like Scarborough Fair has kind of encoding in it with the herbs that are to ward off evil, and it's based on an older song called The Elfin Knight, which was about a much more magical sounding song about a supernatural lover. But talking of supernatural lovers, let's go over to Rokurokubi, who have been working on a song to do with the fair themselves. So I can't see Rokurokubi yet. Their first song that we just heard there was Come to the Fair. And I wanted hello, this is Edmund and Rose Ayo who make up Rokurokubi. I hope I've pronounced it correctly. Just tell us a little bit, first of all, about your inspiration for that first song, Come to the Fair, because that was nothing to do with this commission. You'd already written that, I know. It is on this album, this brilliant album.
No, it's not. It's on our
is it not? Why do I know it then? Have I got the wrong album?
It's on our
the Cornwall Carnival's there, isn't it? This is on your new album.
Yes.
Indeed.
Which isn't out yet, but it will be soon.
And what's the title of that, Rose?
It's called Iris, Flower of Violence.
Oh, beautiful. So tell us a little bit about your relationship to fair and what made you write a song about it.
Well, I think the thing that mainly inspired this song was a place we visited in St Albans, which is a dance organ museum.
Yeah, theatre.
Well, dance organ theatre.
Which, basically, these old things they're like giant beasts of the past that were steam powered. They would have tons of different organs and instruments all over them, and originally they would be driven to fairs on the back of steam traction engines and things like that. But the sound of them is just incredible. You know, they work off a scroll, and the scroll goes in, and we spent a very bonkers afternoon in there having tea and cakes and things like that, and just being taken around all the different machines.
Amazing. It's reminded me that my niece, who's 4 years old, we went to Gifford Circus, the sort of very nostalgic circus, and she quite enjoyed the circus, but she mainly loved the I don't know if it's steam powered, but the old fashioned organ. Yeah, and tell us a bit about what inspired the lyrics. I think you're a brilliant lyricist. And
Thank you. Well, it's actually our friends and us often organise gigs and events and things, and it often feels very fair-like being with all of them, and we all dress up, and there'll be live art and lots of performances.
So do you have a friend called Margot who sometimes wears the head of a bear?
I do have a friend called Willow, but he's not really the type of person to scare crows.
Probably befriend them. You never know.
Okay, brilliant. And you're not playing. What instrument are you using that sounds like a?
Oh, it's a keyboard.
It's a keyboard with a particular setting on.
Yeah,
Yes,
organ, honky organ sounds.
Honky tonk.
Honky tonk organ sounds. And
Yeah, brilliant. I also like the kind of the animal-y quality of your fairgrounds song as well, because that very much feels like something that links to the menageries at the fair and us bringing out our kind of animal selves and stuff.
Well, I think I'm always very inspired by the original Wicker Man film, and I was picturing that a lot while I was writing it, especially all the animal masks and the horse that someone wears, the horse mask.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like sort of wild dreamscapes, sort of all these crazy calamitous things happening.
Yeah, I moved to Hastings, so I thought it would be a little bit like living in the Wicker Man, but without the human sacrifice.
The old town is definitely.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, we're going to hear another song, which I am now going to pick up the right album cover for this, which is this beautiful album cover. It's basically because I love the album cover and want to hold it up. So the next song we're going to hear is Carnal Carnival. We'll talk about it afterwards. I think we'll hear it first, and it's going to be accompanied by a piece of artwork by Rose. Rose is a beautiful artist. Did you want to say anything about the artwork before we look at it, Rose? Or maybe you want to say it afterwards?
During the lockdown, I've been making a lyric book and doing lots of illustrations for each song. So this is the illustration for the song that you just heard, Come to the Fair. But it goes with this one too.
Brilliant. It goes with this one too. Yeah. Here it comes. Brilliant. Thank you. That was at the Carnival. Well, we've talked a little about, in the last salon about the carnivalesque. In fact, it was Claire, who we're going to meet later, who talked about the carnivalesque and that idea of the world turning upside down. What was the inspiration for your carnival song?
I think it maybe was to do with the ephemeral nature of a carnival, how it it can't last a very long time. It has to. There has to be an end point, because everybody puts so much energy and.
It's like a fire.
It's like a fire, yeah.
Sort of, everyone brings the fuel and throws it on, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and everyone sort of has it large, and then it dies down, and it becomes the ashes. And
so that was kind of what the song was about. It's relationship that doesn't last. So yeah, that kind of idea.
Yeah,
very passionate at first, and then petering out gradually.
Yeah, brilliant. It actually relates very much to the workshop we were doing on Fairgrounds at the weekend, and somebody said, well, it's so dreamlike a fair or a carnival that it comes in and these kind of magical things happen, and then it disappears, and it's almost like you've dreamed it. You know, there's just like little things left behind, and you maybe have been transformed, but it can't go on forever. It can't be a non-stop party. We have to have miserable things too. Okay, we'll talk about the song that you wrote specially for sort of exploring this Rock on Rock Fair project now. And if I just talk a little bit about Horn Fair first of all. So I got kind of a little bit obsessed with people wearing horns in various different ways. And of course, we've got the tradition of Jack in the Green here, where people do wear antlers or ram's head horns. I think we've got an image to show, which is Julie, who's been working on the project. That's a fantastic, beautiful ram's horn headdress that she made for Jack in the Green. And I've got a picture here as well, which I might show in a minute, which is somebody who's called Spencer Horn in a brilliant book on costumes, folk costumes. This is somebody in Jack in the Green also wearing ram's horns. And so we had Steve Roud on for the last Salon, and he talked about the fact that there were these horn fairs where people traditionally wore horns, and the two best known ones that he wrote about in this book, The English Year, the two best known ones were Ebano Fair in Sussex, where the winner of the cricket match wins a pair of giant ram's horns, and very intriguingly Charlton Fair, which was a much more bacchanalian fair where everybody wore horns, and even the gingerbread had horns, and women and men cross-dressed, and there was drunken debauchery all round, and it then got banned. And both Rokurokubi and Lunatraktors, we've all been exploring this song called Horn Fair, which is the story of a girl riding through the forest on a grey mare, and she meets a stranger who comes out of the forest and says, can I have a ride on the horse? And she goes, oh, no, my mum and dad would say that was terrible. You'd mess up my hair and mess up my outfit. But she does let him on the horse, and then they both arrive at the fair with horns on that are described as filigree and gilded with gold. And that is obviously, some interpretations of that is that it's just to do with kind of bawdy, what might have happened in the forest. But there's also a kind of more supernatural explanation. And I think, do you want to just tell us, first of all, what you felt sort of reading the more traditional song that we discussed, the Horn Fair, before we listened to your version? What did you feel about that version?
Well, it's very mysterious.
Mm. Multi-layered.
Kind of ambiguous, because you don't really know who the horn figure is, or whether he's a positive character or not. He's a bit sinister in some ways, and perhaps magical, but that's never really said outright. So I
find it intriguing as well that he's the narrator of the song, which is quite sort of surprising, because it's like having the house carpenter, which I've heard you sing beautifully at the Stag Inn. It's like as if the kind of devil character is singing the song. So it's interesting in that way. We'll listen to your version of the song, and then you can tell us a little bit about how you interpreted it and created your own Horn Fair song. So if we can have that, and this is with some of my photos of the woods. I didn't have any nighttime wood photos, I'm afraid.
And on we will travel, my beautiful making this journey to sell our fine wares, and you'll not give your heart to a man at the fair. The woodage is leery, the birds cease to sing, but me and my grey horse, we fear not a thing. What's that in the shallows? I make out a form in a velvet black cloak with a pair of bright horns. A beast so peculiar, so handsome and tall, that I cannot be sure if I see him at all. Rubbing my eyes and clutching so tight to the reins of my horse as this creature of night is gliding towards us as if on the air, demanding that he'll take a ride to the fair. His voice is a ringing funereal bell, but something inside me responds to the knell. He touches my hand as if reading my thoughts, and I say, you cannot take a ride on my horse, my sweet little darling. He says with a grin, do not be afeard, I won't lead you to sin. I'm but a poor traveller, hungry and cold, and I have seen things that can never be told. I was giving up hope when I saw you just there, and I'll ride with you now to the ever no fair.
Thank you very much. I loved it. It was really, really gorgeous. Tell us a little bit about your take on and kind of creating your own version of that song.
Well, you mentioned that it seemed a bit odd that the song was written from the perspective of the horned figure, and so I decided to write it from the perspective of the girl travelling instead.
Well, that's sort of something you do a lot. You like to imagine yourself as a different character when you write. So yeah, and then yeah, just playing around with that and playing around with the music itself. Sort of yeah, I sort of came up with the music side, and she sort of did the lyrics. But sort of starting with Baroque ideas and ideas of sort of Elizabethan dances, because you said you wanted it to have that sort of feel. And yeah,
we talked about working in three different time periods for the folk musical idea: the Elizabethan, the Victorian, and the contemporary. And I guess Come to the Fair is much more kind of like you say that with when the steam organs came in. But yeah, talk a little bit about your kind of choices of instruments and stuff like that. I'm not sure what you're playing, but I'd love to hear.
I'm playing a bouzouki. I'm playing an Irish bouzouki, and it all sort of started from that because of the tone of it. It's like the closest thing I've got to a lute, and but it also sort of lent itself to that, like I say, sort of sedate, courtly dance, like a galliard or a pavan or something like that, where they were all slowly walking forwards and backwards in line.
Yeah. And that's how we there's the kind of bridgey bit that's like do 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 do. So that bit we both kind of imagined, that kind of dance, and that was what we were.
Brilliant. I love it. It also has a very sort of riding rhythm to it.
Yeah.
And it is kind of interesting, that kind of Well, the whole metaphor of riding, but also that dance sort of back and forth and up and down the horse. I loved it.
I think when that bridge sort of comes in as well, for me, in hindsight, listening back to it, it is kind of like that sort of the magic of that figure, the horned one. You know, like, and there is a sort of, I don't know, I feel it sometimes when I'm in the woods on my own, and you can really get lost, you know, and sort of find yourself in this place where your imagination can go wild.
Absolutely, and of course, to get to Hastings, to the Rock Fair, people would have been coming through the Weald, this absolutely huge forest, certainly back in sort of medieval times. Great, brilliant. I also love the fact that there's lots of songs on your album that are kind of about the human meeting the beast, or the human meeting the supernatural. So it felt like a sort of song that the original Horn Fair song sounded like the sort of thing you might have written anyway. Yeah. Did you feel that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's always, for me, kind of like the fact that we have those two sides inside ourselves. So yeah, I think I'm right about that.
Absolutely, it feels like quite an archetypal sort of thing, a bit of a kind of an alchemical wedding between the animal and the human. And the fairground is a good place for that, as well as the journey to the fairground. Okay, we're going to move on now. Thank you so much, Edmund and Rose. You've been brilliant guests. We are going to move on now to Lunatraktors, Clair Couteur and Carli Jefferson, who make up Lunatraktors. Hello, Claire and Carli. Oh, look at your hairdressers. I love it. Oh my goodness. That's brilliant. Julie, who we just saw with the ram's head, actually it was her friend Emma Morton who made it, not her, but she nearly popped up in the salon wearing her ram's horns, and then she hadn't planned it. I think it would have been a brilliant, spontaneous moment, but she decided not to. I love these antlers. Amazing. Hello, welcome. Lunatraktors describe themselves as a broken folk duo, and I absolutely adore their music. They're also artists across different forms as well, and Carli's also a choreographer and used to percuss with swamp. That's the right way of putting it. So tell us a little bit about what you've decided to explore that relates to fairs.
We've been doing a couple of different things. One of them is looking in the broadsheet archives at the Bodleian, which are conveniently online.
Brilliant!
They've got scans of a lot of broadsheet ballads. Broadsheet ballads are cheaply printed pieces of paper from about the 18th century to the present, in some sense, which have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of folk songs on, a lot of which look rubbish on the page. You read them and you think that's just bad poetry, but if you start singing them, they start doing something interesting. Lots of them have they have links, known links with tunes, but the groups of tunes and the groups of songs are kind of two different. They're almost like they're two different sides of the folk tradition. So lots of songs are written to the same kinds of tunes, or there are multiple tunes for different songs, and there's lots of songs where we don't know any kind of tune for it, which is great for people like us because we can make up new tunes for them.
Exactly, and you do it so well. And Julie actually mentioned as well that ballads were one of the things that were sold at fairs. So I don't know if you went to a fair and you could buy a song about that fair as a sort of souvenir, but you mentioned something about fairground calls, the songs that came before the fair arrived, Claire.
So one of the things that we found when we looked at when we downloaded hundreds of fairground ballads, many of which are from the Midlands. Actually, Scotland has lots. The Midlands have lots.
My part of the world.
Yes, that's where Carli's family's from too.
Oh, is it? Brilliant.
And then there's a bunch from Ireland as well, but lots of these songs are at line fair, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
They're presented at. They're not written about any particular fair, so they're flexible, multiple fair songs. So you can sing about the fair that's coming to town, in the middle of town, and just substitute the name of any particular town fair that you might be doing. So they're kind of they're like an advertising tool. So they tell you what might be happening at the fair. There'll be rides, there'll be, coconut shies, or there'll be dancers, or there'll be freaks like Carli and I.
Sorry.
So that's one side of the thing that we've been doing, and then the other side of what we've been doing.
I guess from my perspective as the dancer or the choreographer, as you mentioned, and the more rhythmic side of the duo, even though we're both very strongly involved in the rhythmics and the melodies and the harmonies and all of it, but was thinking it kind of reminded me when I heard the other lovely people in the duo earlier talking about that how do we sustain, the question that came to my mind was, how do we sustain that carnival? Like, the energetics of that is it builds and builds, and then it kind of explodes, and then it has to dissipate, or it has to fall again, in terms of a wave of how we as humans find that beast or summon that beast within ourselves, and then it explodes and it roars out, but then we can't really sustain that, or there's just entire chaos, so it's these moments when we're allowed to let something out and let something free, and that in amongst other people. So for me, that rhythm of how something can be sped up really slowly and steadily, or gradually to that point of absolute climax, or how something can how rhythmics in general or music has the effect of soothing people and calming them down at a certain point if things are getting too rowdy, like the perfect DJ in a way. So I feel like the musicians would always be very aware and sensing what the public were doing and how that whole environment was working energetically, and knowing where to push the rhythmics next in order to pull out that energy a bit more, or to just kind of sustain it for a bit longer, so that's
I mean, it was news to me that actually dances were a really big part of the fair. I didn't really realise that, but that you had all the fairground drives, and then at night there were these dances through the night. And just what you're saying now is that reminding me of that idea of we've got a bit wild with the dancing, now we're going to have slow dance moments.
I mean, people like Hastings, you have a very hectic one and then you have a slow one, but
right.
I mean, the thing is that we should remember is that people were really great at dancing. They knew lots of dances. They danced at any occasion. They danced every weekend. Right up until we live in Margate, which is a seaside town, and had big dance halls, and people were dancing, right up until the 60s.
Yeah.
3 nights a week. But
as a social interaction, gathering, and not just on their own on the dance floor kind of.
Yeah, I mean, that's what my mum would say. She would say that was where you met. We said we waited to the fair to meet up with somebody, but my mum would say, we went to dances, we learnt dances, and that's where we met our boyfriends and our husbands.
The interesting thing about dancing at the fair is that a lot of the dances in Elizabethan fairs, but also later on, were circle dances.
Yes.
And the fascinating thing about circle dances, of course, is that they're not gendered. Unlike most dances, there's a male, in which there's a kind of male part and a female part.
Yeah.
One follows. Circle dances, that doesn't happen. And they have this kind of weird, gender-free utopian quality, until you start realizing that actually, in lots of circle dances, there's an inner circle and an outer circle. And just like in the expression, joining the inner circle means that you get in with the posh crowd. So there's a status division between a larger outer circle and a smaller inner circle.
Oh, how interesting.
Which is
interesting.
Just because they're the best dancers, but probably because they're the people with the fancy clothes and the social access.
I suppose the inner circle gets to be seen, don't they?
Right.
Whereas the outer circle perhaps doesn't get, if you're turning inwards. Do you turn inwards in a circle dance?
Lots of different circle dances. Yeah. Mostly it's going sideways, then turning round, going into the middle, and then going out again.
Right.
It makes me think also it's quite interesting to put them in the middle, obviously, because there's less of them. But there's also a kind of effect of penning them in as well. That effect of the commoners are now going to surround you, and you can't.
Whoa.
That's an interesting play,
and
with
especially
with the class.
As loads of circle dancers traditionally go in and then go out again. If you're frightened of the peasantry, everyone coming in is probably going to be quite terrifying.
You've blown my mind about the hokey cokey. I'm going to see it.
Well, that's the interesting thing about the hokey pokey and why non-gendered dancing is so interesting and so kind of funny or absurd, because that big distinction which cuts the cultural world into two parts usually. I mean, many cultures have more than two genders, which is nice, or did until the Brits came along and started moving everyone. But yeah, so that interesting thing about where the hokey cokey comes from. And also, of course, where the conga comes from. We were talking last time about the runaround as a kind of semi-dance, semi-children's game, semi-anarchistic thing where you grab people's hands and then you run them through the town, in and out of shops, through people's houses, up and down stairs, and all that kind of giving somebody the runaround. Yeah. Which is quite a kind of anarchistic.
It sounds a little bit like the medieval football thing, but without the ball or the two sides. But something similar.
You have to kind of surrender to it, I think, don't you? You have to go with it. You have to embrace it or not. Yeah. I guess that's that moment also of letting go and going, okay. And what we were thinking about the circle dance particularly is that, and in the Carli and things like that, is that every person, you're often standing opposite somebody that you don't know.
Yeah.
You have
do know but don't like.
You have to at some point weave with them and maybe even touch their hand, or maybe even spend some time touching their body, feeling their sweat. Like you really have to make contact. And that is already breaking down those conventions of, we keep it safe, we only dance together, and the controls.
I think it's also true of like the fairground rides, the fighting that was part of the fair.
Down and all that
the world turned upside down and the intermingling is really interesting, and the shapes as well of the fair. Those circular rides that kind of somehow they mirror kind of the circle dances, but they're also the seasonal changes. They're also that up and down that you're talking about, of the release and then coming down, and then everything builds up and then it comes down.
But the other thing that we've been doing is working on a very well-known fair song. Yeah.
I'm like, we should get
interrupting me to tell me to talk about the thing that I'm to talk about. Shush you for a minute. So we've been working on Couture Home Fair. So we're going to play you some little sketches of Couture Home Fair, but a bit of background about it. Obviously, there's famous versions of it from Sea Lice Fan, and more recently from Bellowhead, a really excellent version. And then Rosanna, that's you, has been rewriting some of the lyrics to go with Hastings Fair, so we thought we might sing you some of those new lyrics.
Brilliant.
We're going to start with the Couture Home Fair is actually not a folk song in the sense that we know who wrote it. It was written by David Anderson probably in the 1830s, although he didn't release it in his book of poetry until the 1860s. And it's set to a Northumbrian pipe tune, a tune for the small pipes, which are kind of smaller, sweeter bagpipes, quite like the Irish pipes. So we're going to play you a kind of the original tune of Couture Home Fair, which is called The Wild Hills of Wanney, i.e. Wansbeck Valley.
Brilliant. Fantastic.
Start with that. I've just got to change over the...
This is with the Truty, isn't it?
Yeah. Right. I've just got to change over
Oh, interesting. My horns hit the gong.
Okay, apparently I don't have to change over.
This is the hazard of horns.
Oh, indeed.
Hazard of horns.
It doesn't have that in it,
It does now.
We didn't agree on that. So that's the Wild Hills of Wonny, the pipe tune, which was borrowed by David Anderson for his Fair tune. And we're going to play you a slightly faster one on a different pipe, a very old kind of cross to a trans-European music style, and goes way further than that, which is the pipe and the drum. If I can find the right pipe.
On my very reasonably priced military drum.
From Hobgoblin Music, if anyone wants one. Can everybody hear us okay? I'm not hearing anything.
They're maybe not going to answer us.
No. Beautifully. That was absolutely cool.
Okay, good.
So as you can see, it's all very much in the sketching stages, but
brilliant.
But that's where we're at right now.
So the thing that we're doing basically is trying to investigate the possibilities of the tune with different kinds of moods. If we were going to take it further into a kind of folk musical and use this as a running refrain throughout the piece, obviously bringing it in different different arrangements, different instrumentations, you could give it a very different feel.
Should we go for this one and then do the song?
This one, you mean that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to do one now, which is a more kind of in a 12, and is a bit more kind of landscapey.
We've rigged obviously a piece of boat that we found
We found it by some
in
bins.
Margate Harbour. It's taken a few years to put it on our wall, but now it's very good. It aids the hanging of various paraphernalia.
I love it. I love it.
So now what we're going to do
So much.
We're going to sing some
We're going
of
to sing one more, and then
Rosanna's verses for you.
Oh,
yeah. We love
Some
them.
chanting. On a Friday it came in the month of July, over great greening hills where blue sea meets blue sky. The folks were all thronging the roads everywhere, making haste to be in at the Hastings Rock Fair. 'Tis a day when all courtships are often renewed, all disputes set aside, or more hotly pursued, when Barleycorn Johnny seems fit to declare his law for his king at the Hastings Rock Fair. You can buy a big bullock or a frisky young lamb, you can buy a stud stallion or a curly-horned ram. Mind a warning of horning if you take your wife there. Many men are made cuckolds at Hastings Rock Fair. There's more monsters and wonders than you've ever seen, from deserts and forests where the travellers have been. Rainbow birds that can talk and a great dancing bear. Many a beast found at Hastings Rock Fair.
brilliant! Oh my God, that was so exciting.
It's still quite rough and ready at the moment.
No, it was great to hear it. It was great to hear it.
It's just come round and it's bleaching us. So you know.
Yes, you were suddenly enlightened. No, it's brilliant. Just to explain as well that I was experimenting for the audience. I was experimenting with the existing lyrics and trying to modify them with what we know that was actually at Hastings Rock Fair. So some of the real things were there. Hastings Rock Fair happened in July. The original fair. What's it? I've forgotten the month.
April.
Yes. So some of the lyrics are the original lyrics, but adapted to Hastings instead of Couture Fair.
One of the verses that we sung, which was about Barleycorn Johnny or John Barleycorn, so that's about refined corn spirit. So that's about some pretty rough booze. So yeah, all of the things about Little John Barleycorn or the spirit of the corn are about very strong alcohol and what happens when you drink it. So that verse is from the original, from David Anderson's original lyrics, but is not included in the versions of this from the 60s or more recently from Bellowhead. So
right, I have heard the Barleycorn.
Okay,
I really like that. I couldn't remember whether I'd included that one or not, but also very relevant to what Julie was saying about the fairs. In Elizabethan times, not that this is an Elizabethan song, but people generally drank watered down beer. But the fair, you got proper.
You got much stronger booze,
The hard stuff.
Very relevant to Jack in the Green as well. That's a very much drinking out of the horn. There's a lot of drinking out of horns at Jack in the Green. That was absolutely brilliant. I don't know what else you would like to because there's so much you could say. What's really struck me is how you could make a piece of music sound. I know that tune very well, but how you could make it sound so amazingly different, and also how relevant percussion is to the fair, and all the kind of the rattle of the rides, and all the kind of rhythmic sounds that you might hear that aren't music, but they're mixed in with the sound.
Absolutely.
Just depends on the context.
Yeah,
exactly. They are a kind of music. Yeah, exactly.
From that perspective of what we've said our kind of genre is of being broken folk, I think that's part of it now, is the synthesis with all of the other sounds that are happening, or the imagining of that. Yeah. I think we do imagine a lot when we hear music. We hear other sort of other percussive elements that just come through naturally, depending on where we're from. And I really liked the reference in the lyrics to the sea. That we felt much more that the sea was there. But that broken folk idea in that, well, okay, so we've got these traditional tunes or whatever else, but what can we do to really grind them up and to put different influences in there? Because everybody was coming from a different taste and background and a culture and a class and a family and all of a belief system. So
the idea that there aren't the idea about original pure folk traditions is at best a kind of nonsense, and at worst a kind of ideology. And so this feeling that a pipe tune might be known, have one name in one part of the country, and another name in another part of the country, and another name in France.
Yeah.
Because musicians routinely travel around. I mean, we have to because people get sick of us. You can't just keep playing in the same pub all the time.
Well, we can't play in any pub at the moment.
Well, yeah, quite. But yeah, so this idea that we're really into, that things about purity in tradition need to be taken with a pinch of salt.
Well, that's very much feels like almost like the philosophy of the fair is that hybridity, is that diversity, is that nomadic quality. And like languages kind of move and change, songs move and change, and fairs move and change and pick up different people and different influences as they go, and leave different influences as they go. And I think that's one of the reasons why people were scared of fairs, because what new influences might a fair bring,
and what information is being shared, because under, as well as the dance happening or the jollity, there's always going to be people that are trading in information and telling, that trade of information is also seen as well as useful for some people. It's also very dangerous, isn't it? Because there's things being spread that other people don't want other people to know. So there's a really, really mixed, multi-layered experience of even the dance.
Yeah,
as people talk, as they pass.
Yeah.
And people who are professional travellers, or from travelling communities like Irish travellers or Roma travellers who've been part of British culture for 1,000 years at least, that they are kind of welcome at the fair to some degree, but they're not really welcome on the street.
Yeah.
It's the same for people like me who was born with kind of birth differences, or differently abled people, or that this feeling that the carnival is a place where difference is at least temporarily.
Yes, and the hierarchy of that is changed for that moment in time.
Potentially. I mean, I think the reality is
potentially, yes, exactly.
The reality is also that the fairs and fairground owners, but also people who were in charge of travelling fairs, were not always particularly nice to the people who were working for them, or the animals that they were taking around with them.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, as we get into the 19th century, the whole kind of the terrible entity that was the British Empire becomes very influential on fairs in terms.
Yeah, I mean, that has to be seen as being in effect from at least the 17th century.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So it's a long-standing thing, and it involved lots of displacing lots of people, and the kind of taking away of common land, which is just about finished now. There aren't any commons left. I think there's a couple of them, and they're not owned by the Common Society anymore. But yeah, I think it's important, whilst talking about utopianism and fairs, to also go, yeah, but actually they were pretty horrible a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think it's a complex picture, isn't it? I'm just going to invite now Rokurokubi to come in as well, so that you can have a little exchange between musicians and perhaps talk to each other, as opposed to me.
That was wonderful.
We loved it.
Yeah.
Really likewise. We're also working on a new record at the moment.
Very good.
Yeah, we should double gig at some stage. That'd be fun.
Yeah,
that would be like the most awesome gig for me ever. I'm coming already.
One of the things that I found really interesting, like sort of going back to broken folk, because we often get sort of slapped with the title of folk, even though I think a lot of folk purists don't really see us as that, and we make up what comes to us, both sort of melodically and lyrically, everything is made up. And I was wondering if you guys, in your sort of journey, like how does that sort of affect you? How do you work with that, or with influence, I guess?
I think we discussed this a little bit today, in that we're making a new record. Well, it's obvious that the most of the folk clubs, or the people that, they're still not going to really like us. We're not gonna necessarily just push against them to annoy them, but I would much rather that a more diverse range of people with much more diverse tastes in music appreciate what we do. and because we do appeal to people in their 60s, 70s who actually experienced kind of psychedelic folk and stuff like that at the time, and that was not twiddly and just very kind of sedate. That was rousing and crazy, you know. So I think we're
yeah. I mean, I think it's funny with the folk tradition. Like I think we approach traditional folk with a great deal of love. You know, we listen to a lot of traditional folk and some of the oldest and weirdest folk we can find. But then what we make doesn't always appeal to the people who appeal to us, if you see what I mean.
Right.
So it's like unrequited love for the folk scene.
It's tragic. This is a tragic statement.
Yeah, we love tragic songs. That's what we love. Tragic comedy is what is our.
That's the genre of the world right now, isn't
it?
They kind of doubt, I think, in the percussive as well, which has always been where we really started.
Yeah,
with
no
just
drums. There's never been drums in the English folk tradition.
Yeah, they've found that really hard for us to, you know. Well, yeah, but there's a girl whacking on drums. This definitely isn't folk.
No
and
drums
it's like, oh, okay, but a lot of folk traditions. I mean, if you haven't got anything else, then at least you've got your hands and feet and your voices, haven't you? If you haven't got anything else to play, surely that's the base of a lot of
rhythm and voice. So we're into rhythm and
music.
voice.
So.
Julie mentioned percussion in Elizabethan times. There's definitely something you would have heard at the fair.
Absolutely, yeah. It was full. I mean, it's just a kind of absurd Victorianism where, you know, they were a bit scared of percussion, like they were scared of a lot of things because it represented, you know, people power and disorder.
And again, that rousing. I think, you know, we don't want to get people too excited. What happened there?
Somebody else was talking about rough music. I think it was Chris Hare in the Salon.
The Charivari.
So it very much connects to that.
European tradition of pan, pops and pans.
Yeah.
Sonic attack. But also, of course, the recruiters. You know, drums are the kind of a kind of military tool.
Yeah.
We use a military drum and to do a kind of anti-nationalist. Anti-recruiting somehow. But it's an interesting thing. I think this thing about all of our stuff and all of your stuff, Rosanna, and I think it sounds like you two as well, that is based in a great deal of research, a great deal of like passionate amateur knowledge, trying to find out stuff and listening to very old music and being inspired to make something weird.
And as you said about, you know, how you feel, just generally how you feel when you are with friends and amongst friends, and what kind of materialises is that you all get costume on, you all transform yourselves, and that's constantly shifting, and that's accepted, and that's all fine. I think that kind of experimentation also then is allowed to come out in the music, isn't it? Or it draws out people, or both.
Well, I see a real continuum with modern festival scene. So I do Boomtown every year and help out there, and like there is just this mad continuum, even in the music and stuff itself, you know, like different parts of like music then come through into modern gypsy jazz and even like gabba and donk and stuff like that. And like there is just this, so many similarities in the things that we've been discussing over these seminars, and what I've seen and how I feel. There is a sort of mad need for, you know, ecstatic explosion, and everybody's sort of, you know, really coming to the bubble, like, you know, kettle or something like that.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the thing also with like these dance tunes. They start off quite sedate often, and then the plan is you just play them faster and faster until everyone falls down.
On that note, sadly, we have reached our musical and a climax. I've certainly reached the climax of my excitement for today. Thank you so much all for coming. We unfortunately have to wind it up after an hour, but it's been such an absolute pleasure to hear you both play and speak, and it's just great to hear from you all. If you are watching, if you want to put any comments in, you can add them to chat, and we may be able to give you some feedback on that later. So I do apologise if you've been trying to communicate with us and we haven't replied. And there are 5 more MSL salons at this time on Sundays. They're also showing on Isolation Station next week. So thank you very much to our fantastic guests, and thank you to our audience for coming, for joining us in this fairground moment. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Come to the fair, all our friends are there. Margot